Fun for
Amazing.
us.
Well, thank you both for joining us. Now, Blake, we wanted to spend this session before we're joined by Dougie later on, talking about what kind of a process you go through when you're arranging music, how you sort of draw together. I mean, Caledonia is such an iconic song. There must be 1,000,001 different versions, and we've just heard 2 versions. So how do you go about sort of sifting through all of that creative information and starting to arrive at an arrangement?
Well, I usually start with a harmonic analysis of the original piece. And it's a difficult one I mean, this arrangement in particular, I think was, this piece is difficult to arrange because it's one of these songs that means so much to everyone, but it's a very simple tune, a very simple melody, and a very simple harmony structure as well. And that's really its strengths, I think, is it's because of that simplicity that it affects us on such a deep level. So I tried to keep as much of that as possible in my arrangement, but also expand it enough to make it more than a vocal cover. There's so many arrangements out there now with the vocal fad that's kind of been happening, the a cappella fad that we've been going through these last 20 years with the sing off and pitch perfect and groups like the Pentatonics. There's so many vocal covers out there. I'll call them that, vocal covers, because they're basically the exact same thing as the original song. Someone's gone to guitarchords.com or something and looked at the harmony and then just scored it into voices. So with this one, I really tried to go a little bit further and make it more of a choral arrangement and expand some bits and actually have some bits of composition in there too. So for me, the mark of a great arrangement is when arranging and composition kind of marry each other and there's a space in between that it occupies. So for Caledonia in particular, I started with just a harmonic analysis of the basic piece by Dougie MacLean and then kind of scored that into voices. And actually what we got is the very end of the piece. That's the bit that I wrote first, is the hymn-like chorale section at the very end, all homophonic. And then what I did was I broke down the melody, which in Dougie's version is very kind of, it's very free. He's just like, let me tell you that I love you, and I think about you all the time. And I thought to myself, how can I score this and put it on a grid? So I just ended up choosing, let me tell you that I love you. And obviously we don't sing it like that, but we kind of have a chant-like quality to it. But scoring it on the page, I had to come up with some sort of way to quantize all of that together, to put it into that grid and slot everything together. So for me, the first things that you do are harmonic material. And once you have the melodic material, which if you're doing an arrangement, usually you do, then you look at the harmony and then how do you fit it in rhythmically? So I'd say those are the 2 big things that we start with.
And I've noticed when I was listening to the Celtic Women version that they also have compositional elements in it. The ya da 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 doo doo is a sort of similar thing. It's completely different to your version, but they've sort of used that sort of different way of marrying together composition elements with arranging.
Absolutely.
But they use text from Dougie's song that you don't choose to use. And was there a thought process behind that?
That's an interesting one, actually. Great question. Originally, I put all of the text into the piece, and it was about 7 minutes long. And we recorded it for Decca, and we just decided to cut some of it. So that's why part of the second verse is just kind of cut out there. But that's really the only reason that I have for that one.
How did you choose which verses got the chop?
I can't really remember. I think, well, originally in Dougie's first rendition
tell us now
of this
before
piece,
he arrives.
Yeah. And I think he has a few different versions of this, and he's actually changed the lyric over time. I'd actually love to ask him about that. But originally it was something like I've wooed the ladies or something. Like, I can't remember the lyric. And then he changed it to I have tried and I've kept on trying. And yeah, it's really interesting. I originally scored it as that first thing, and I thought, well, maybe this sounds a little bit chauvinistic, so I'll just take it out completely. So I think that was, it really is just like a small amount of, like, I'll just take this half out. That's great.
You've changed it and you've revised it a number of times. It wasn't originally just written for voices, right?
Right, yeah. So if you the version that Tori just played actually was a version with strings, and that's what came first. So in the session, it was scored for mostly homophonic choir with VOCES8 and a few solos that stepped out. Johnny sings the solo, our bass sings the solo at the beginning, and then I sang the solo in the second half. But the rest of the piece is all pretty homophonic. And the string section, which is kind of the parts that you were singing in this version, that kind of accompanied us and was this bed of sound underneath everything else. And it's really fun to put this together with a choir. In fact, it was my friend Kyle Karam, who's a director in the United States, who had the idea of kind of putting it all together into one thing. He was like, how can my high school singers sing with VOCES8? I thought, well, Caledonia would be a good piece to do that because we already have 2 parts written. I'll just score the orchestra part for choir. And so that's kind of how it came into fruition originally. We've been doing it ever since with many groups throughout the States in particular, actually.
It's absolutely beautiful, and I'm sure everyone here will agree that it's so much fun to sing. It's got its challenges, especially that middle section, which is what we're going to be tackling this week, the section that comes sort of from bar 71 onwards. But that's your sort of original compositional element of this arrangement, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. And I've tried to fit in as much of that as possible. I really think that, I mean, for me, the mark of a great arrangement, as I said before, is that marriage between composition and arranging. And for me, like Gene Perling, if anybody here knows Gene Perling from the Singers Unlimited, kind of the original multi-trackers. I think they were actually the first people to ever step into a studio and multi-track the human voice in the 70s and 80s, right before Queen started doing it. And really, I think they kind of, well, I guess they were the first to do the choral multi-tracks. And they were quite a jazzy group. Gene Perling was the director of that group, and he did a lot of the arranging. And they completely reimagine everything. In fact, Gene goes as far sometimes as to change the melody of several pieces. You know, instead of somewhere over the rainbow, he goes somewhere over the rainbow, puts it into Mixolydian. So not only is he changing the harmony underneath to make the piece mean something else, but he actually changes the melody at certain sections. So for me, those are kind of my arranging heroes, and there's so much of them, their own kind of fingerprints on the piece. And for me, that middle section, the bridge that we were just talking about, is really, it has my fingerprints all over it for sure. So for me, that's actually kind of a moment of, it's kind of the climb through the highlands. I mentioned before, there's this incredible, kind of an ancient volcano in Edinburgh, if anybody's ever been to Edinburgh in Scotland. It's right in the middle of the city. And this middle section of the piece is like climbing that it's called Arthur's Seat. And you're usually at the very end, you're really out of wind and you're like, oh man, I'm so tired. And then you get this beautiful overlook. So that's the chord that we arrive at. Where is it?
78, 79?
Yeah, 79, the downbeat of 79, when everyone arrives on that chord. And I sort of made the joke last time that the alto is G sharp, is the dissonant part of that chord. And it's kind of like the pain in your side, you know, after you've climbed the mountain through the highlands. So yeah, it's totally original material there. And it kind of links us between keys as well. And actually, I think it's as far away from as you can get. We go from the key of A, which is the section, you know, bar 60, the second chorus, and we get into this B flat chord that kind of roots us and moves us into the key of F. So it's really far away from our original key of A. But I love those sorts of those little challenges that it's like the magic kind of spice that you put on top of the dish.
That's amazing. Really, really lovely. And it's so satisfying. As an alto, it's very satisfying to sing.
That dissonance, yeah.
Yeah, really, really lovely. Now, guys, it's over to you. We've heard 3 different versions of Caledonia. Now, I'm sure that Blake won't mind if we have a completely open and honest discussion about it. I think that they're all equally moving in different ways. And I want to hand it over to you guys. What do you think? Which one do you find particularly moving? And what is it that really makes you feel something? The bravery. I'm going to go to Juliet because she's wearing a gorgeous stay-at-home choir t-shirt. Hi.
I've got 2 things. I think Dougie's original is just the simplicity with the guitar. It's just beautiful. It just sort of says it all. But then, the best version, my favourite version so far is the VOCES8 choral version. There's something about the harmonies, and we've talked about getting an emotional connection. And since I found an image in my head that I've been connecting with it, I'm finding it so hard to sing without bursting into tears. So
it's such a moving message, isn't it? Give us a nod if you sort of identify with what Juliet's saying. What is, if you don't mind me asking, what is the image you've got in your head?
It's a picture of my entire family. We met up. I've got family that live abroad, and elderly parents, and we didn't manage it this year, but last year we met up from abroad, and it's my whole family in an image.
That's amazing. Oh, thank you for sharing that. And who else would like to just chime in? Please feel free. This is quite an informal session. Lane, hi, how are you doing?
Hello, good, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Juliet, and I mean, I think that the emotions I would ascribe to the three versions that we've heard. I mean, Dougie's one is obviously, you know, it's very classic, and there's the melancholy bit, right? Because it's he's homesick. He wrote this in his early 20s, and he was homesick and everything. And then the Celtic Woman version is so beautiful. It's got this sort of mystical element coming into it, and yours, Blake, is so melancholy. It makes me cry too. So, like, I guess my question, what? Talking about Gene Perling and what he does to sort of tweak the melody a bit, what did you do exactly to make it sound so much sadder, and not in a bad way? You know, it's just so, it just tugs and tugs at the heartstrings so much.
Sure. Well, so one of my first instruments was the guitar, and one thing I love about Dougie's version is that he plays these open sonorities on the top strings. And actually, I think he tunes his guitar in an interesting way to get those sonorities, and often it has these dissonances, particularly on the 5 chord. It's like so you have a chord that has a third and a 4 in it. It's like this kind of sus4 voicing, and it's a dissonance that happens. And I tried to put that as much as possible. When it's in voices, I think there's a certain amount of sustain in it that brings about that melancholy kind of quality. And I can't say that I did it on purpose, but it just ends up happening. It's one of my favorite things about arranging for the voice is that you can get these clusters. I mean, of course, composers like Eric Whitacre and Lortzen use that to their advantage quite a bit. The add 9 sonorities. But I think hearing, when you translate it to voices away from the guitar, it's really, really beautiful and moving. And I also think that the thing that came to me first was, like I said, the very end, the hymnal section. And that's really stripped down to, that's kind of Dougie's original harmony, mostly. But I almost feel like you sort of have to earn it in some ways, you know, like you have to get through the strife and all that difficult kind of crunchy harmony to get to the most simple part. And that's sort of how I envision it, because the beauty of the song really is its simplicity. I agree with both of you that Dougie's original version, that the simplicity in it is just astounding, and it's kind of overcoming in some ways. You know, you're so struck by it. So yeah, I think that I haven't done anything like changing melodies or anything like that really, but I can't quite aspire to the same level that Gene Perling is. He's kind of the hero.
It's kind of two different ways to approach that simplicity, isn't it? It's almost like, well, it is. They come from completely different musical traditions. You know, the simplicity of a hymn and all of the connotations that brings with it, and the simplicity of guitar music and the sort of the folk roots of that. They're different, but they kind of come from the same sort of community-focused space, don't they?
I really think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, there's some versions as well with Dougie singing with other people in the background as well. So I don't think it's the first time that it's been sung by multiple voices. Maybe not thousands of voices. So this will be.
Let's ask him when he arrives. And I'm going to go to Arthur next. Hi, Arthur. I'm not sure we've spoken yet, have we?
No, I don't think we have.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. I'm an expat Scot in that I live in north of England now. But the original version of Dougie's one really does take me back to not just my Celtic roots, but my family roots. And that's what I think of and hear of when I sing the song. And I think Blake's done amazingly in converting that emotion that we would feel singing that song in a family environment back home. And that really strikes for me. And I agree, we do earn the choral, the chorale bit at the end very much, not just through the difficulty, but through the emotion. But I think it's worth getting there. So thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. And I'd also love to hear both yours and anybody else who grew up in Scotland, and the first time, maybe a memory of the first time you heard the piece. Our tenor Ewan grew up in Edinburgh, and he remembers kind of being a kid and listening to the piece and singing it. But maybe you have a particular story of the first time you heard it, maybe with your family.
It wasn't actually as a family. Although I'm from Glasgow, I originally heard it in Edinburgh during a Celtic folk festival. So that was quite special. It may even have been the very first Celtic folk festival in Edinburgh, with if I'm just remembering back to everybody who was singing at it then, but that's the first time that I heard it was there.
It's so cool how everybody in the country obviously knows the song now, and as soon as it comes on in a bar or a pub or something, everyone starts singing.
Well, after I heard it, of course, the whole of all the bars in Edinburgh turned into folk clubs after things like, as you probably well know, Blake, and people just turn up and they sing or they play their instrument or have you. And I remember, of all things, having a penny whistle in my pocket, and somebody started playing it, and I was trying to play along with a penny whistle. That was quite fun.
Very cool. Great memories.
Do we have any other Scots in the room who have a memory to share, a story of Caledonia? I'm going to go to 69933, and then I'll go to Kay. Hello, 69933. Please wait, caller.
Yeah, hello. My name's Valerie. I don't know why I've got a number instead of my name.
Let me rename you, Valerie. Is it IE at the end?
It is, yes.
Okay, right, you crack on and I'll rename you.
Okay, well, the memory I have was I was going out with a boyfriend who was learning to play guitar, and we got into the Aberdeen folk club scene, and we bought the vinyl record of Dougie MacLean singing this, with that lovely picture of a cottage on the front. So I remember that time when I was like 17 or 18 years old. So I'm another expat Scot, by the way. I'm in Athens in Greece. So
from the Athens of the north to the real.
From the Athens of the north to the Athens of the south. Yeah.
So far away. Do you get home often, Valerie?
Well, I tried 3 times this year, but it kept getting cancelled. So so I'm booked again for October. So maybe it'll happen. I don't know.
Oh, well, best of luck.
Thanks.
Oh, and Kay.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
I'm a Scot in Scotland and incredibly happy to be doing this particular song. I think it doesn't have a particular memory for me, but it does sum up for me the fact that most of my family are now south of the border and have just come to visit and revisit and reappreciate the beauties of the northeast of Scotland in the Cairngorm area. They were absolutely full of it, and I think want to come home too.
Yeah. And now want to come home too, did you say?
Yes, now they want to come home.
Don't blame them. Keep giving me a wave if you have something to say. Oh, I've got Morag down here. Hi, Morag. One sec. Don't forget to unmute. There we go.
Good.
Hooray.
All right, so I was brought up in England, but my parents were both Aberdeenshire, and they always talked about going home to Scotland. So I've got this awful split personality because part of me is English, but my heart is often in Deeside. And we were up in Deeside, a good few years ago now, and we heard Dougie do a concert in a Boyne. And he's so we bought his music and he signed my copies for me afterwards. So it was a really special evening. And yes, he sang Caledonia. So that's my memories of Dougie.
Blake, do you feel like you've become more Scottish since you've been living in Edinburgh?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the Scottish accent is actually a little more similar to the American accent than the English one. So it's maybe actually easier to hear for me. But yeah, it's a beautiful place to be quarantined, I have to say. I couldn't imagine. I mean, maybe Michigan. I'm from Michigan originally, and maybe that's a bias that I have. But both are equally beautiful. And Michigan has all these. It's surrounded by lakes. If anybody's ever been to Michigan, you realize it's surrounded by Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, kind of on all sides of water except for the bottom. And Scotland also has that aspect. You're right by the sea, and I love being able to hear the seagulls. There's also all these mountains in the distance. So. It's a great place to be, and I definitely feel more at home there than perhaps in London where I was for the past few years.
Yeah,
I've tried to infuse as much of that as possible into the arrangement. Certainly that middle bridge part.
Well, it's lovely that you've sort of taken under your wing this iconic Scottish song when you've made Scotland your home as well. It brings a whole new layer of significance to it, I think.
there's something about, and I have to say, I think that Dougie slightly influenced me to make the move to Scotland, because listening to him sing, I think I have a Celtic Connections CD that was given to me many, many years ago when I was in high school. And it's just him and an acoustic guitar. It's totally live. And listening to him sing kind of evokes these images of Scotland somehow, even though I'd never been there. But my family's originally from Scotland, several generations back. But it just made me imagine what it was like. Something about the way that the lilting quality of his voice moving up and down, and the accent. I don't know. There's something about it that always made me want to move there and at least see it. And so, for me, it was top of the list for a place that I wanted to at least adventure to and then eventually move. So I have to thank him for influencing my move to Scotland.
Well, you'll be able to in just 10 minutes or so when he comes into our session to say hello. And is there anybody else from Michigan area in here? Unmute yourselves and say hello.
Wave your hand again.
Hello. From Livonia.
All right.
Your hometown.
That's
yeah.
my hometown. Yeah, my parents still live there.
Yeah. And I have to say that in the western part of the Upper Peninsula, the Keweenaw Peninsula, that's where this song takes me to that beautiful, the woods and the water and the wind, and it's just wonderful. But anyway, really enjoying this. Thank you.
Yeah, Linda, it's great to meet you. And I have to say that part of the world also really reminds me of Scotland.
Yes.
I have just like a magnetism or something towards that part of the world. And I actually wrote an entire album about the Upper Peninsula of Michigan because I was so drawn to it. So I think there must be something in the water with those places.
They say it's something in the air up there. It's so pure.
Something, yeah. What I love about those two areas of the world is, well, first of all, they're quite rugged. If anybody's never heard of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Michigan kind of looks like a hand, and then there's this part above it that kind of never gets mentioned. And in fact, when people like draw it on T-shirts and things, it's just they often just forget the Upper Peninsula entirely. It's almost part of Wisconsin and Canada, but there's not that many people that live up there, and it's very rugged and it's very kind of sparsely populated. But there's lots of kind of mountains. There's this place called the Porcupine Mountains. It's right on Lake Superior. And I think as you move up into the upper parts of Scotland, into the Highlands and things, it's a kind of a similar vibe. And I just love that about the remote parts of the world where you can find so much culture. And these people just seem to live a slightly different life that's a little more relaxed. Maybe it's the same down in Cornwall as well. But as an American, I'm really enjoying going to these remote areas of the world for sure. Yeah. It's very inspiring.
And Helen, you're from the Michigan area too?
Yes, I am. Grand Haven.
All right. Nice. Beautiful area. Right on the lake as well.
Yep, about a mile away from the lake.
Lucky.
Yeah.
Born in Grand Rapids.
All right. Yeah, Grand Rapids. I lived there for a summer actually.
Ancestors in Kalamazoo and Ann Arbor.
Very, very cool.
That's
great to be here.
That's quite a good showing from the Michigan area in a Zoom of 100 people. 4%.
Strong singers. A very strong singer.
Congratulations, you guys. I've got a couple of people with raised hands, so I'm going to go to the very, very polite Kitty and then Lindsay. Hi, Kitty. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Kitty. I can't quite see where you are. Hi.
Hello. Hi. First of all, I first heard this song from Celtic Woman. My daughter gave me an album of Celtic Women, and I loved this song right away. So I'm so happy to do this with VOCES8, and I've loved all the versions that I have heard so far, and it's very moving to me. Even though I've been to Scotland, but I don't live there. I now live in Toronto in Canada, almost 30 years now. I'm originally from Hong Kong, and this song brings up so many emotions. Because I have a lot of family and friends still in Hong Kong. And since maybe 15 years ago, once my kids were older, I've been visiting at least once every year, and I still miss them. And so thank you for this very lovely song.
You can thank Dougie. For bringing it into the world, imagining it, creating it.
Yes.
I think it's such a transcendent concept, this idea of coming back to the place that you know and love and never really wanting it to become a stranger. You know, when he says, if I should become a stranger, it would make me more than sad. And I certainly feel that.
Unfortunately, I am afraid it's becoming more of a stranger to me now, the place that I grew up in. And well, I don't want to talk more about politics, but that's unfortunately some things we don't have control over.
Right. And I think you're probably not the only one. There's many of us, especially right now. I haven't been to the States in a very long time, and I've never been more of a stranger to my home in Michigan. So I can relate to that for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that.
Nice. Yeah, thanks. And Lindsay, you had your hand up as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm a Scot living in Helensburgh, not far from Loch Lomond. And like my fellow Scots who've already spoken and some of the expats, I think there's something about this song that's really evocative, and it does make you think about coming back. But also just wanted to pick up on something Blake said, because there was a lot of Scots went to Michigan in the early 1900s, including members of my family who made their lives there. Right. And whenever they talked about Scotland, they talked about the old country, because that's where they came from. And coming back to visit the old country. They never talked about going home because they'd made their new homes, but they were coming back to visit the old country. And the only other thing I was going to say, and this was a question for Dougie, was that I heard him singing Caledonia with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra behind him. And that was a really special occasion. And he called them his backing band, which I thought was really funny.
Love it.
And it's very apt that you've just said that you had a question from Dougie, because I've just let him into the Zoom and I can see him sitting very peacefully on page 5. Dougie MacLean, thank you so much for joining us. It's so lovely of you to drop into a session. And do you remember what Lindsay was saying about doing that performance with the Royal Scottish? Was it Royal Scottish National Orchestra?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Dougie.
Hello there.
Hi.
Yeah, I do remember that particular show. It was pretty amazing to have a full symphony orchestra behind the song. Well, behind I eventually made a record with them, but particularly with that night with the song in the concert hall in Glasgow, and it's just an amazing feeling to have the full symphony come up behind you. You can feel the kind of hairs rise on the back of your neck, you know, just when they all come in. So yeah, it was good, but I tried to keep the whole show a bit informal, and that's why I called them my band, because the classical concert can get a wee bit sort of staid, and I wanted to relax the orchestra and relax the audience, so we had a bit of fun as well.
And I hear that you've been doing living room concerts throughout lockdown. How many are you up to now? Because lockdown's been going on for quite a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm very lucky. I have what is the old school, which is part of our studio, and it's like a little hall, actually. And I set up a stage and lights, and my very clever son set me up with kind of automated camera system. So we shoot it with 4 cameras. So it's more like a proper, I wanted to do a proper concert rather than, do it around my kitchen table, because I wanted people to be able to kind of sit down, pour themselves a glass of wine and feel that they were actually at a concert, rather, and so I'm up to number 50 now.
Wow.
Well done.
During the big lockdown, I did one every second night, and for half an hour, and I set myself the challenge of not repeating myself. For the first 30, I didn't repeat myself. So, and they were all my own songs. So it was quite a task. I was digging up old songs from the past that I'd, forgotten about. And it was brilliant for me as well, because, there was a kind of, it was a hard sort of time, and it gave us all a little bit of something to kind of do over, every day, every second day. But I'm now up to number 50. It's brilliant.
That's such a mega effort and such an enormous volume of work that you've got. Where can we go to find these if we want to? Because I'm sure loads of people who are hearing about this for the first time want to go check it out.
The shows are all archived on YouTube. Actually, if you go to Dougie MacLean live on YouTube, they're all archived there, because they went out on YouTube and Vimeo and my Facebook page. So you can see you can see the whole kind of progression of them through the whole last 50 on YouTube. Yeah, it's great because it's the old school. It was the old village school that I went to. It was because I live in a little village here of about 10 houses. And I grew up here, and it's the village school that I went to, a one-room village school. And it's the school my father went to in the 1930s, you know, when he was a wee boy. And then I was able to get it, the school closed down, and then I was able to get it and turn it into a studio. And so it was brilliant to do these broadcasts from my old school, you know. It was just one of these magical kind of things to be able to do.
One of the things that we've been talking about in the choir over the whole of this project. So we started, just for your interest, we started about 2 weeks ago now, working with VOCES8, and I'm going to introduce you to Blake from this wonderful vocal ensemble VOCES8 in just a moment. Working for the last 2 weeks to build this piece. We've got more than 4,000 singers singing, 4,200 and something, I think, which is a slightly terrifying number. But what we've been centering the whole project around is creating an image of home and creating an image in our own minds of belonging. And it's really nice to hear that you've got that heritage with your studio, that it's somewhere that you actually grew up in a sense.
Yeah, it's very unusual now. I feel very privileged that I traveled away. I've spent a lot of my life traveling around the world playing shows, but I've always lived here in this village, and it's an unusual thing, and that's part of the Caledonia song, is that kind of sense of belonging. You know, I live in a beautiful part of Perthshire, and I think it's particularly easy to feel attached to a place when it's as beautiful as Perthshire is. But I'm a country boy, and I grew up sort of playing in all the woods and that around here, and they're the same woods that my father had played in, you know, and then my own children played in them, and now my grandchildren play in them in the same places and climb the same trees. And I love that kind of sense of place like that, you know. But you know, you don't have to grow up in a place to have a sense of belonging to it, you know. My wife's Australian, and she has a great sense of belonging to the little village of Butterstone now, you know.
It's a wonderful kind of rootedness to have in your own sort of area and heritage, which I think, you know, is a rare thing and a beautiful thing to have nowadays.
Yeah, and you know, my generation, we were all encouraged to travel away. And I remember when I started playing music, you know, people said to me, well, if you want to make a career as a musician, you need to move to London or even Glasgow or New York or somewhere like that, you know. And I sort of went, no, I quite like the idea of just living where I grew, you know, where I grew up. You know, I love it, and I was able to prove that you could do it. You know, and especially now the way technology is, you know, you don't have to give up that place to do lots of interesting things. You know.
Well, we've found that we've got ourselves a global community. Just give us a wave if you are Scots in the room. We've got a few. We've got roughly 1 or 2 on each page. 4 on page 4. Lovely. And give us a wave if you're from a country other than the UK. Yay! Woohoo! Great. Lovely. Well, there's somebody who I am really excited to introduce you to, Dougie, and that is the arranger of the piece of the version of Caledonia that we're singing. He's a tenor in VOCES8. His name is Blake, and he's right here tonight to kick off our questions, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Hi, Blake. How you doing?
Nice to meet you, Dougie.
Nice to see you.
So I'm absolutely geeking out. I grew up listening to your music. Actually, in Michigan, we were just talking about the places that we call home, and for me, that's Michigan in the United States, which actually reminds me quite a bit of Scotland. So that's part of the reason that I actually moved there. But a huge fan of your music, and it was such a pleasure and a joy, a journey to arrange it for this group here. I have a question about how it kind of came into being. There's all these rumors, these legends of you kind of sitting on the beach in France as a 20-something-year-old and missing home, and then just writing this transcendent lyric out. Could you maybe explain a bit of how it came into being?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a bit of it that way. I was living in Germany, actually. I'd worked with a couple of Scottish bands in my very early 20s, and I was playing with a guy who played a lot of American banjo, and the American banjo players use a lot of tunings. And I remember he had his guitar tuned in C tuning, and I was having a wee fiddle with it. And the whole song came out. I've actually got my guitar here. I was going to show you, because the whole song came out as in C string, and it all came out of this little climbing passage. And actually the whole song is in that little climbing passage. And then I ended up traveling with 3 Irish guys from just busking all over Europe. And I ended up we'd been doing it for about 4 months, and I ended up in a beach in Brittany, just outside Paimpol. And I was very homesick, and I wrote the song. And I finished it in the youth hostel where we were all staying, which is the kind of last verse about the fire or something. And then I played it to the guys the next morning when they all woke up. And this was about 3 or 4 in the morning. I played it to the guys, and it was all too much for us. We were all on the train home the next day. We all ended up. They went back to Ireland, and I came back to Scotland. And yeah, and it was a genuinely homesick song, which. Took about 5 minutes to make, really, you know, because it was, I think if you're a songwriter and you connect into that magic that is music, you know, because I really do believe it is magic, you know. I think, in fact, my little daughter, when she was little and went to school, she was asked by the school teacher, so Julia, what does your daddy do? And she says, my daddy's a magician. And I thought that was great, because it is magic. And I think you sometimes just kind of connect with things subconsciously, and it just all kind of comes out. And that's not just melody wise, but lyrical wise as well. You know, it's quite difficult sometimes to explain where it comes from. It's I do think maybe it's the old hippie in me, but I think it is magic. You know, there is something kind of happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think sometimes it feels like a gift that just kind of drops into your lap and you don't know how it got there.
Yeah, and you're not always open to it. You know, you have to be in a certain frame of mind. I used to find that that writing songs first thing in the morning or very late at night, they would come then, because your mind didn't have the sort of baggage of the day to kind of fill it up. So when you're just waking up, you could kind of, you were making some kind of connection. And when you were very tired before you went to bed at night, somehow you were making a wee bit of a connection with the part of your brain that was kind of dedicated to that kind of thing, you know. But it certainly is magical. And for me now, you know, the song Caledonia, it's about that sense of belonging, you know. And I remember the first time I played it was in West Berlin. And so the people weren't Scottish. It was a big, and they loved it. And I remember turning to my friend and saying, "Well, we'll keep that song in the set," you know. And but it was more of to do with the sense of belonging than something that was Scottish, you know. And that's what's been great about this song. It's so many people have connected with it in all kinds of different ways, you know.
Absolutely. Well, we certainly connect to it as well. I want to open the floor to everybody else here too, but I have one more question just before that. I mean, I'm sure you've performed this piece hundreds, maybe even hundreds of thousands of times over your career. And what's something that keeps it fresh for you? What do you think of that makes it new every time? I'm sure the piece has taken on different meanings, but we're trying to think of things that, you know, we're a choir of over thousands of people singing this together. What's something that we can think of that maybe you've kind of unlocked over the period of playing it hundreds of times?
Well, you know, when I sing it, kind of, I revisit the 24-year-old young man that was homesick on the beach in Brittany, and it's always fascinating to go and visit that place. You know, I think that's how I sing it. I kind of like I connect to that with that young man, that young me. And it's different every time. But I mean, it's such a broad. There's such a broad sentiment in it, you know, a sense of belonging. It doesn't need to be tied down by anything specific, I don't think, you know. And that's I think if it would have been different if I had sung Scotland, even, you know. Caledonia is what the Romans called the area around here where I live. This was where the tribe, the Caledoni tribe lived, and the Romans called Caledonia, called this area Caledonia. If I'd called it Scotland, it would have been too specific, I think, you know. There's something lovely about the Caledonia word, which is kind of a bit kind of ambiguous, you know, for most people, you know what I mean? And
ancient magic,
so
yeah.
you can connect to it from a other place. If it had been Scotland, it would have been much harder for people to sing it. And I didn't think about that at the time, but that's obviously something that's happened with that particular wee song, you know. If you know what I mean, if you can understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for sharing that magic with us. I think we certainly feel it as well, even translated through my arrangement as well.
Yeah, no, I've listened to your the recording of it, and it was beautiful. The arrangement was beautiful. It was.
Thank you.
Yes,
that means a ton, a huge, colossal amount coming from you. So thank you.
No, it's lovely. No, it's beautiful.
And it's been so nice to hear from people from all around the world how they're taking your song about your homeland and making it applicable to them. I do think that the word Caledonia helps it to be that one step removed from referring solely to Scotland, so that it becomes more translatable for people.
Yeah, and maybe subconsciously when I was writing it, there was a, you know, I've always liked to have kind of more universal themes in the songs that I write, you know, but I don't, you know, it's not always conscious, and maybe that was subliminal why I wrote it that way, because it made me feel a bigger thing, you know, as well. You know, I mean, I love to feel things when I'm singing and when I'm writing, you know, and you need to feel things. It sounds stupid, but yeah, so maybe it was subliminal that I chose not to sing Scotland and chose to sing Caledonia.
Yeah, it reminds me of a little adage we've got in the choir, which is you mustn't sing until you must.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, but I do believe singing is like that. I think if you're singing properly, you know, if you're singing, if you're getting into it, you know, that's why I've always thought that, you know, you don't have to have a brilliant voice to be a brilliant singer, you know. And I've had some wonderful renditions of songs with people with not very great voices, but they really are singing, you know, because they're in their head, they're right inside the singing of it. And I've had people with wonderful voices just reading the words off the page, you know. And so that's another part of the magic of it all.
Yeah, let's throw the floor open to questions. Give me a wave if you'd like to ask Dougie a question. We have got, thank you so much for submitting your questions in advance. Having looked through them, quite a lot of them seem to have been answered. So do just give me a wave. I am going to go and talk to Stacey. Hello, Stacey.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much, Dougie, for being here. This is amazing. I'm geeking out too. Now, my first question, I think you've really answered, was what does home mean to you? But then to add on to that, when we're singing the piece, when we're singing Caledonia, how do you believe we can best bring that sense or feeling of home to the piece, to the song? Because home is so many different things. Obviously, we're all over the world. I'm in America. So, yeah, how can we bring that feeling of home?
Yeah, well, for everybody, it will be completely different, and it might be a big thing or it might be a small thing. You know, I mean, it's a sense of belonging, and I don't think you should tie yourself down to kind of even location. You know what I mean? It can be as broad as you want it to be, and so you can connect with pretty well anything that gives you a sense of place, you know, or a sense of I don't know. There could be in the room of your house, you know. I mean, it's not. You just got to kind of like get into a sense of belonging kind of mode, I would think, you know. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think you just keep it personal. I mean, I think one of the hardest things about all kinds of singing and writing songs and that is making them is being yourself, you know, being completely yourself. And that's one of the hard lessons that I learned very early on. And I was lucky, you know, that I learned that when to go on the stage and, you know, to sing and to make music, it works when you are yourself. You know, if you try to be something else, it'll never work. You know, but as soon as you, but it's a bit like standing naked on the stage. You know, you're revealing yourself to, you know, but as soon as you connect with your own sense of self, it works for some magical reason, and then you have something to say to other people too, you know. And so I'd imagine as a choir, if you can connect to something of yourself, then the culminant of energy of 4,000 people or whatever it is, all singing, will be, you know, will be bigger, and yeah, it is that kind of thing. It's very hard to be authentic, you know, yourself, but that's what you have to do. And once I learned that, because when I was in my early 20s, I tried to write pop songs, and I tried to write, because people would tell me to do that, and record companies would say, "Oh, that's too banal and parochial. Go and write a hit single," and I couldn't do it, and I just wasn't that kind of writer, and I wasn't that kind of singer, but that was what everybody was telling me to do. And then when I just went, no, I've got my own internal music, I'm just going to do that, all of a sudden it started to work.
I think what you've said is so important, but particularly with a big choir, especially with so many different people in it, it's easy to think that the expectation is on you to be the same as everybody else in the group. But in fact, what it is that makes it so powerful when you have so many different individuals coming together is the differences they have, the different individuality that they bring to the sound, which makes us really much greater than the sum of our parts.
I totally agree with you. I think I found the same thing with the orchestra. You know, when I played with the symphony orchestra, that, you know, if you listen to each of the individual violinists or the players, you know, they weren't playing perfectly. You know, I mean, they were having wee bits of things going on, but when you put them all together, you have this. And if they had been all playing exactly the same, we see it in the studio. It's called double tracking, and it doesn't work. You know, if you double track something exactly the same, well, you know, if you record something exactly the same, but if everything's got that, each one has this little bit of a variety. When it comes together, it has this lovely kind of sound, you know. And I hadn't thought about that, but choirs are exactly like that, because it's all the different voices and all the different ways that people kind of are interpreting it. As long as you're all singing the words basically at the same time, I suppose.
We promise we'll get
You don't even need to do that, I don't suppose.
It's like an emotional stereo, kind of, you know, like all the different sides double tracked, but in emotions instead. It's great.
Yeah, it's brilliant. No, I've worked with big choirs actually. I did some shows with a 100 voice choir, and did a couple of concerts with them, and it was brilliant. You know, the only problem was it took that long to get the 100 voices onto the stage. Right. We had to choreograph the kind of the walking on. It took about 5 minutes to get everybody on stage. You know, but yeah.
Well, thank God we don't have that.
It was brilliant. You know, it was a brilliant thing.
Amazing. Now, there's one person here who we haven't introduced yet, and that is my partner in crime, Jamie Wright. Jamie, are you here? And do you have a question lined up from one of our members?
I am indeed. Hi, Dougie. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Jamie. How are you?
Very well, very well. Thanks so much for joining. And it's really lovely to hear you talk about, as you say, in the symphony orchestra, each violin not necessarily playing the perfect line, because it's something we've actually talked about in the choir, of not aiming for perfect, but aiming for something that really speaks to us as individuals. Now, I won't ask a question of my own. I will hand it over to the stay-at-home choir. And there's one that I've particularly liked, and I'd love to hear the answer. Marcia, alto, if you are in, give us a shout. Marcia, are you around?
I am, yes.
Hello, what was your question for Dougie?
Good evening, Dougie. It's wonderful.
Hi, Marcia, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I was just wondering, of all the people you duetted with or guests that you've had in your audiences, if you could duet with someone around today, who would it be?
If I could duet with somebody.
Your song, Caledonia.
Oh, that's a really hard question. I've got a list of people that I would love to sing it with. Oh, I don't know. I maybe Joni Mitchell or something, you know. We wee Joni Mitchell, the wee James Taylor. I would quite like that. That would be quite nice, you know. But no, I've got a whole bunch of people like that that I would love to do to do it with. But it's a hard question because each one would be different, and each one would be. I've got lots of lesser known musicians that I would love to do it with too. You know, that work in my kind of world. So it's great. I mean, collaborations are always great, and it's always good to have things to dream for.
Definitely, yes. Well, thank you very much.
Not at all.
That's a lovely thing to say. It's always worth having things to dream for. I think that's something I might hold as my mantra now going forwards, especially at a time when we haven't really got a lot to dream for at this particular moment in time. We have to be extra imaginative.
Yeah, and I think music's wonderful for that. You know, I mean, it's the one place where you can go where it's back to the magic again. You know, it has a very big healing power and power for. I do some work for an organization called Nordoff Robbins, which organize music therapy for in some of the kind of in homes, and I was really lucky to be invited down to Rachel House, which is a wee place where they not far from here, where they have kind of terminally ill children and really sick children, and I was lucky to sit in on the music session with the music therapist, and they brought this wee girl in, and she was obviously very, very sick, and she had all kinds of tubes and things like that, and she was emotionless and had nothing in her face, and the lady who was doing the music session just started playing the piano and singing the wee girl's name, and all of a sudden the wee girl's face kind of all lit up, and she started kind of reaching out, trying to, like, it was as if she was trying to catch the music that was in the room. And I always believed it was magic, but that kind of confirmed it for me, you know. And so during this particularly tough time, I think music's good for us all, you know.
Oh, that was me on mute. I said, yes, I couldn't agree more. Dougie, it's been absolutely wonderful to have you with us tonight. Our traditional way of saying thank you is by a double jazz hand because we're all on mute. Thank you so much for coming in. And I think it would be appropriate to finish with your version, well, the original version of Caledonia. So thank you, Blake, Jamie, my partner in crime, for a brief appearance. Thank you, Blake, for talking about your arrangements. And I think Andrea from VOCES8 was in the room as well. But a particular thank you to Dougie. And we'll close. Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you. I've just been reminded. Dougie has kindly given his time to drop in on this session. And Dougie, would you like to say a little bit about the charity that you're supporting?
No, well, that's one of the charities that we support, and I have another one which is the Serenians in Edinburgh, which is a charity for homeless people, and they do some fantastic work. And we have my wife and I have run a festival for the last sort of 10 years where we've set that up as a charity, and so we got to know a little bit about the work they do down in Edinburgh, and they have a farm where it's out that are, you know, really troubled, and, you know, like they describe themselves as being that's the last chance for them. You know, it's people that have been through the system and can't really don't have much nowhere else to go and to be helped, and they give out food to food parcels and things like that. So when we had our festival, we used to have baskets of outside the concerts and asked everybody to go to their fridge and bring a tin of beans and bring it along to the concert, and we collected a whole bunch of food for them. So if anybody feels like popping a wee thing into the Serenians, that would be great. And it'd be easy to find if you look at they'll be on the internet. I can't remember their web address.
We just posted the link in the chat, guys. So Stay at Home Choir will be making a donation to Serenians.
Yeah, that would be
on all of your behalf as a thank you to Dougie for his time. If you'd like to pop anything to say thank you, then the link is in the chat, and we'll send it round afterwards on email so that you can say your own thank you if you would like to. And now all that remains is for me to thank you one more time, and we'll finish with the original version of Caledonia.